In my opinion, this movie reveals that Hugh Grant is sinister way too early. And then from there, the movie never kind of escalates how sinister he really is. You're sort of sitting there being like, oh, what could make this movie really interesting is if he's actually onto something, or he's going to put them and challenge them. And like, there's this level of like genius or like kind of calculated brilliance that he has despite being so evil and cruel. But no, like it's just cuckoo man goes stabby stab. And unfortunately, I think if an hour of your movie is going to be conversations about faith and philosophy, you need to have a payoff that's a bit more interesting. But hi guys, I'm not even going to bother with an intro. I need to talk to you about Heretic. This is the most disappointing film I've seen all year. So this is mostly going to be a spoiler-filled discussion, but I'll let you know when the spoilers are about to start. Hopefully I do a good enough job running through my problems with this movie that you can keep up if you haven't seen the movie, but I will let you know when this video is going to turn into a full-on spoiler discussion. This is the most disappointing movie of the year. So for those of you who don't know, the basic premise of this movie is Hugh Grant is playing this kooky guy that invites two Mormon women, Barnes and I think Paxton. They're Mormon women that are there to convince him to join their faith, right? And then slowly they realize that something more sinister is afoot and he might be keeping them hostage and kind of putting their faith to the test in really horrifying ways. So you see the trailer, you see this awesome performance from Hugh Grant. You go, what an interesting premise. Is this going to be one of those movies where some things could be supernatural or religious based, or they could have a logical explanation, but it has your head spinning? You know, what are they going to have to do to like get out of this situation? Is it going to be like Saw, but kind of for faith? What an interesting idea. And when I tell you that this movie does pretty much nothing more than what the trailer gives you, I'm not exaggerating. You know, that moment in the trailer where it turns out he doesn't actually have a wife that's making a blueberry pie and it's just a candle, that's the most interesting reveal of the movie.
I will go and check on the pie.
You know, I watched that trailer and I was like, man, if that's in the trailer, I can't wait to see the movie. My head is going to be spinning, going to be so many interesting questions. No, not at all. The movie ends exactly where it starts. You know, it starts with this idea of like, you know, is religion actually real? Is there one true religion? And like, you know, or is faith just what you make it? And the movie kind of ends like that too. Like, and you spend so long in these like conversation discussion scenes between Hugh Grant and these sisters, and they are so interesting initially. And you're like, okay, surely this is all going to pay off later. You know, initially the movie starts and Hugh Grant is saying like, well, do you agree with this parts of the Book of Mormon? You know, do you agree about the fact of like men having multiple wives? Do you agree with these kind of patriarchal, misogynistic, problematic parts of the Book of Mormon? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, so when they go down the stairs, right, when they start doing these evil tests that he has for them, you know, surely they're going to be going through room after room and test after test that is like acting out or subjecting them to the most problematic parts of their faith, and whether they can still hold on to believing that, you know, their religion is pure and for the better of humanity. That's going to be like the premise of the movie. Or something more supernatural is afoot and Hugh Grant is either like a godlike figure or a demonic-like figure who's trying to like conjure a miracle or something supernatural through them. Something. But no, the movie just like fucks around for like an hour. I've never seen something so disappointing. And it's just such a shame because for the first 30 minutes when these women sit down and you're slowly starting to realize, oh, Hugh Grant's a bit off kilter. He's a bit odd. These questions are incredibly personal. He's really trying to challenge them on their faith in a way that feels like bullying rather than curiosity. And you're like, where is this going? But unfortunately, it doesn't go anywhere more than that. In my opinion, this movie reveals that Hugh Grant is sinister way too early. And then from there, the movie never kind of escalates how sinister he really is. You're sort of sitting there being like, oh, what could make this movie really interesting is if he's actually onto something, or he's going to put them and challenge them. And like, there's this level of like genius or like kind of calculated brilliance that he has despite being so evil and cruel. But no, like it's just cuckoo man goes stabby stab. And unfortunately, I think if an hour of your movie is going to be conversations about faith and philosophy, you need to have a payoff that's a bit more interesting. Leaves me in the drive home sitting there going, oh, do you think that was real or that was fake? You know, can that be interpreted as genuinely divine intervention or like a religious experience? Or are they just all delusional because they've gone mad? But no, I'm just sitting there in the drive home going like, oh, okay, it was just another sort of like generic crazy guy has two people locked in his house and they need to escape. And I'm not alone in hoping for something big, like a big satisfying reveal, because look at this comment that was posted early on when the trailer was released, talking about the idea that maybe he has, you know, a wife that he's trying to conjure up, or there's this like ritual that he's trying to do based on religion. And again, if this was like a tight 80-minute movie that was just a well-made thriller like Strange Darling, I wouldn't be that upset about it. But the reason I'm so bothered is because, again, the whole film's marketing and the initial 45 minutes to an hour are all these discussions about, like, will you choose faith? Do you believe? Are you a believer? And unfortunately, yeah, this movie just doesn't have the conviction to actually go for it and really challenge the audience and, like, have us questioning things that we see. So instead, it's just ends up being like a very straightforward movie, minus a few things which we will need to get into in the spoiler section. That's my spoiler-free thoughts. If you're interested in this movie, I mean, go see it. Maybe you'll disagree, but in my opinion, this is definitely a movie that you should probably wait to come on streaming and just kind of like watch in the background, which I think is a shame, because when you see the trailer and the poster, you think you're going to get another classic A24 profound moving horror movie, but no. Actually really reminds me of The Black Phone. You know, The Black Phone, the trailer was incredible and this initial premise was really exciting. And then he gets in the basement and you're like, oh, where's this going? And then people call him on the black phone and tell you exactly how the movie's going to go. And then the movie goes exactly like that. And you're like, why are we sitting here for 2 hours? Hi guys, just while I've got you, I do memberships for this channel. I would love if you could consider getting one. It really helps out the channel and helps me grow. What's included in the membership is once a week, I am doing a sort of book club where I'm talking about a TV show. Currently, I'm covering Tell Me Lies Season 1. I'm covering an episode a week. After that, I'll let members vote on which show I cover next. On top of that, every 3 to 4 weeks, I also do a quick podcast talking about everything I've seen and watched that I don't have time to do full videos on. So you basically get my thoughts on everything I've seen and watched. This is all for a small cost and it really helps the channel. If this sounds interesting to you at all, please consider getting a membership. Thank you so much, and back to the video. All right, so let's get into spoilers. My big complaint with this movie is I feel like all three characters kind of end the movie where they started. You know, I didn't finish the movie being like, oh wow, you know, they've had their faith completely demolished by this evil prick of a man. I was sort of just like, oh yeah, they had a few questions at the start of the movie. They've left with a few questions. A lot of Hugh Grant's talking points and arguments at the start of the movie are very surface level things that these girls have probably heard like 40 times before. And I know you're probably sitting there at home going like, that's the point. Like, he's just an idiot. You know, he's not smart. He's not profound. And he's just, you know, rehashing talking points you could see on Reddit. And you know what? I agree. If that was the point of the movie, I would 100% agree and just go, well, that's not an issue of the movie. That is just, that's the plot. It's just a crazy man that isn't that intelligent. But the issue is, I think the movie thinks these discussions are really thought-provoking and intelligent. So for a while, when Hugh Grant's starting, you know, trying to get them to question their faith, bringing up parallels between different religions, you're like, okay, let him cook. You know, he starts making the Monopoly analogy, and I'm like, these are interesting stories. Then he brings up Radiohead Creep and how that copied another song, and then they sued someone for copying their song, and, you know, in a way that's similar to religion. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, this is still rather surface level for anyone that has kind of like critically thought about religion before, but surely it's building to something. Let him cook, you know? And then he sets up this idea of like, you're going to go through 2 different doors. One that says belief, one that says disbelief. I'm like, here we go.
It's a simple choice, but it should not be made simply.
We're going to get payoffs to this entire conversation we've had. He's going to put them in these sick tests that put their faith to the test. You know, let's say, for example, I know there's a part in old Christianity that said that I believe women couldn't use tampons or menstrual products or something, you know? So maybe he makes like an awful experiment based on that. All right, just to clarify, I just double checked what it was, and it's the idea that any person that's menstruating is considered unclean, and anything they're touching or anyone that touches anything they have touched is also considered unclean. Like, again, like these interesting tests could have been created on the really fucked up parts of these different religious texts. Or maybe he makes an awful experiment about acting out being one of 3 wives on the Mormon faith. Like, takes these really confrontational parts of like classic religions and gets them to act them out and see if they can truly be faithful. I'm just spitballing here. I'm not the most religiously educated person, unfortunately, but do you get what I'm saying? But no, It ends up being that like either door they pick, they kind of end up in the same place. We have a brief montage where she goes by multiple different rooms that are based on different faiths. Why didn't we get that? What an interesting idea. But no, we don't get that. We don't get her going through the Jewish room or the Christianity room. It just feels like massive wasted potential. So again, these conversations that Hugh Grant is having where you're like, okay, a bit surface level, a bit baby's first questioning of religion, but surely this is going to build to something. It doesn't. You know, they just go down to a room and then it gets into this chunk about where he's trying to make them believe that there's a prophet. You know, and he brings out this old kooky lady that he's had locked up in like another basement that's like starved and genuinely looks kind of like a zombie. And he says, this is the prophet. She's going to like die and then come back to life. So this is another section where I'm like, I'm not loving this. This feels a bit, I don't know, out of left field, a bit contrived. I was really enjoying it just being, you know, 3 characters in a room talking about faith and how that was going to pay off, but fine. I'll see where this prophet thing goes. And then instantly one of these characters kind of just like spells out to the audience exactly why the prophet thing isn't real. And I just found the revelations around Hugh Grant's character incredibly disappointing. There was not one moment that surprised me or kind of like made me really like think about his motivation. And that's my issue with this movie, right? Is you start the movie and Hugh Grant comes off as a bit of a cynical asshole about religion. I saw an interview with Hugh Grant saying that like he wanted the character to have a sense of loneliness. He didn't just want the character to feel evil. He wanted, you know, the character to feel like he was trying to make friends and like for a while genuinely just interested in having this conversation. And unfortunately, I think Hugh Grant does a great job in this movie, but this really is not communicated to the audience. I don't think the script does a good job conveying this.
Yeah, he's a kind of trendy academic. I don't know what the directors meant him to be, but I decided he was a cool prof. Probably rather a lonely man.
The reason I show this is I agree with Hugh Grant's interpretation. I think it's way more interesting than what we were actually given in the movie, what the script actually allowed him to do.
What's so marvellous about me as an actor is I go very deep. I decided, because you can't just be a moustache-twirling baddie.
I think the script just gives us a very one-note villain. The whole movie you're waiting for something deeper to be revealed, something either empathetic or really disturbing and troubling or a sense of misguidedness or something, but he's just a very one-note villain, unfortunately, despite Hugh Grant's incredible performance.
What happened to you to make you that way? So I had him down as lonely. He's one of those people who people just don't like very much, and they compensate by making a lot of jokes and pranks.
You know, very quickly he comes off sinister and like he doesn't actually want to like have his mind changed about religion. So as a result, it really feels like when you're watching those like alt-right people in the Change My Mind YouTube videos, you know, where they debate unsuspecting college people and are obviously not open to having their mind changed. So anything that these college students say to these alt-right people that have these books of facts isn't actually going to change their mind. So these debates don't work. And when these women have their retorts to his points, right? At a certain point, Barnes claps back to him with why she thinks his logic is bullshit. And I didn't even find her points particularly compelling either. Like both sides of the argument were just not thought-provoking, not super interesting, and really kind of disappointing. This is a movie, in my opinion, that needed a supernatural twist or a faith-based religious twist. I genuinely think the movie would have been a lot more interesting if Hugh Grant actually was trying to conjure some sort of miracle. Or if they were able to bring some sort of like divine intervention that genuinely made him feel like, oh my God, through my like awful acts, I've actually been able to like conjure something that can't be explained. But unfortunately, like, yes, you have that moment where after she is seemingly dead or incapacitated, Sister Barnes gets up and in her like final wind manages to kill Hugh Grant's character, right? You know, we thought she was dead after she got stabbed and she like gets up and stabs him. You can make an argument that that is meant to be that moment, that is meant to be that payoff that cannot be explained. But unfortunately, the way it's presented, it very much just felt like that thing you see in typical horror movies, right? Where you think the hero is dead and then they get up, shoot the person and die again. You know, unfortunately, the way it was presented, it didn't really feel like this incredible moment that like has you questioning everything you've seen. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, that was convenient. Oh, now she's dead. You know, like, I don't know, man. Like, I found this really disappointing. And this prophet section goes on for so long. Like, this is a centerpiece of the movie. It genuinely feels like for 20 minutes they're talking about this prophet and, you know, you're going to eat this poison blueberry pie and then she's going to come back to life, yada, yada, yada. And unfortunately, whenever you start actually questioning like, oh, has he done this miracle? How interesting. Another character then quickly goes, actually, no, you did this, 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 and this. And this movie is just full of these things of like making you sit there and listen to these conversations and starts trying to get your head to sort of like spin and ask these interesting questions, only for 30 seconds later to be like, actually, that's not what's happening. This character's figured it out. Sorry, audience. And it's like, why not go for it? Why not go for it? Again, like this movie just could have been so interesting. There were these moments where I was like, oh, is this like this weird purgatory that they're in? You know, when the prophet was introduced, I was like, oh, this is a movie with only like 3 characters. This must be a future version of Barnes. I genuinely thought that maybe the twist of the movie was going to be they're in limbo for like sinning against the Mormon faith and Hugh Grant is like the final test. And like when 2 of them are knocking at the front door at the start of the movie, 2 of them are in the basement and then another 2 of them have been in like the other basement for like 30 years. And it's just this like cycle where they're all meeting each other at different points in their life and they need to like break the cycle somehow. Like I genuinely thought maybe the twist of the movie was going to be Hugh Grant is like a god and they're in limbo and they have to pass all these tests. But no, and that's fine. You know, my idea was maybe a bit of a reach. The reason I thought that was because of the prophet and also the butterfly at the start of the movie when she talks about reincarnation. I was like, oh, is it like a full life cycle that happens in this house? No. And that's fine. You know, that wasn't the best idea. Like, I admit that. But then I was like, oh, surely when they go through the doors, the one that like believes, that goes through the belief door, is then going to do a bunch of tests that makes her question her faith. And the one that is more cynical is going to do a bunch of horrific tests that then makes her believe in her faith. And then Hugh Grant is actually going to let someone go. The movie is a lot more interesting when you're sitting there thinking, okay, there are actually rules that they can follow and tests that they can pass where they will be let go. You know, that is what normally makes these sort of like complex villains interesting. The idea that there is some internal logic. But then the movie just devolves into, I'm just going to stab you now, stabby, stabby, crazy man in the basement is stabby, and all this religious philosophy doesn't really amount to anything. He's just kind of cruel and just wants to, you know, make them suffer before he kills them. Like really, really disappointing in my opinion. And you know what? Again, circling back to my point about Hugh Grant's character, can you imagine if he did actually have a wife at some point? How interesting, right? Because obviously he doesn't have a wife, right? The blueberry pie reveal, you're like, okay, cool, fine. The movie gets going, but then you're sort of sitting there waiting for like, there must be something deeper to the philosophy of this movie, to Hugh Grant's character, something. But no, you know, like I genuinely was really hoping the movie was going to be him trying to prove their faith, but in a really fucked up way. Can you imagine if he genuinely conjured up a miracle, like something that is undeniable through his awful means that weren't explored in this movie, but like he did some insane tests, made them do the worst parts of their religion that the modern version of Mormonism has abandoned, and then they conjure something that just can't be explained, that's beautiful and like transcendent. And then they're sitting there afterwards and their faith is just completely shattered because they're like, oh, we did see something that proved our religion to be real, but the means to get there was this horrifying shit we had to do. And yes, you can make the argument that this was technically done when Barnes was kind of revived, but to me, it very much felt like, unfortunately, the way it was presented just kind of felt like that typical horror movie last win. You know, I wasn't sitting there in the theater like, oh my God, wow, what an incredible moment where all these interesting things are paying off. It just felt really silly. And to prove why this is unsatisfying is Hugh Grant, right, who ends up just being a cynic, which I thought was a boring choice and boring direction to take this character. Hugh Grant, who has been trying to convince them that miracles aren't real and religion isn't real and it's all just bullshit and control is the real religion. When Barnes stands up, he isn't even like, oh my God, how are you doing this? Wow. Oh, and then he dies. That would have made it better if that was how it was presented, right? Because she sneaks up behind him and just stabs him in the back of the head. He doesn't even know what hit him. If the end of the movie was him sitting there genuinely having this religious experience, like, oh my God, you know, I was trying to prove that religion and faith is bullshit, And now this girl that I clearly killed and checked her pulse, which I don't think we actually saw him do, but whatever. Like, I actually confirmed the kill, right? Let's actually say he did confirm the kill, made sure she was 100% dead. Now she is alive, and she's going to be the thing that kills him. And you can see in his face that he genuinely feels like he's seen a miracle. I think the movie would have worked a lot better. At least then I could have been like, okay, there were setups at the start of the movie, and there's an interesting way to end Hugh Grant's character, right? He ends up having more faith than these two women, you know? And it's this weird kind of transference of faith, you know? The girls that came in being believers are like completely shattered and mortified, whereas he dies believing something supernatural has genuinely happened. But unfortunately, earlier in the movie, they also kind of spell this out when they say that that character Barnes was, you know, technically dead before, right? She had like a medical operation where she went under and, you know, saw some bright lights and came back to life. And you know, that can be like medically explained too. So it just feels like the end of this movie is just another example of that happening. And it's just really disappointing in my opinion. And again, circling back to Hugh Grant's character, the reason I found his death so not satisfying is, you know what? If you're going to make him like actually genuinely just evil, really make him evil. Really make me want them to kill him, want them to get away. You know, make him do some awful stuff, put them through these horrific tests and just make him so maniacally uncomfortable and evil and like a really disgusting misogynistic part to him. You know, maybe he wanted to have them as his wives, whatever. But instead, unfortunately, he just feels very one note despite an incredible performance. And that's why I think the wife reveal could have been really interesting. You know, or even if he used to have a wife that died and she believed that faith would cure her, right? Like, the setups are right there. I don't know why they didn't take it. Why not have Hugh Grant's character have a wife that passed away that didn't take proper medical treatment because she believed God would heal her, and now he's jaded and cynical and he needs her death to mean something, so he's trying to prove religion is either fake or real. And, you know, just something where I'm like, oh, interesting character moment, or have me feel conflicted when they kill him. Like, maybe even though he was misguided or evil, he genuinely wanted to prove a miracle to them. You know, even if it was fucked up, can you imagine how interesting it would be if he's like, I can actually show you that your faith is real, and he genuinely earnestly meant that, but the means to do that were horrific and they have to kill him to get out of there. But then he goes, isn't it beautiful that I was able to show you something divine? But no, it was just dumb, evil man is stabby. And when Hugh Grant was talking about the loneliness in this interview, even that's an interesting angle. Like, can you imagine if genuinely he just really wanted to like talk to them for ages and just wanted them there forever because he loves talking about this stuff? And yes, I'm not saying make him likable or redeem him, but just something more interesting. So when he's dying, I feel a bit icky or a bit conflicted or like, oh, what a shame you're a fucking nutcase. But instead, it's just so one note. And yeah, he just tries to stab them and they have to stab him and then they get away. I just thought the movie just had so many interesting ideas. Like, watch that trailer, genuinely watch that trailer and let your mind wander as to where this movie could go. And it just does nothing interesting. The first 45 minutes to an hour, I'm like, awesome. The last hour of this movie, I was just staring at a screen. I felt like I was in a nightmare. I was genuinely like, oh no, oh no, oh no. I don't even know why A24 said yes to this, to be honest. The only thing that felt a bit A24-ish was the beautiful credit design at the start of the movie where it was like around the borders. But aside from that, I even found the movie visually rather disappointing, flat and clunky. Like, it was a well shot and well composed movie, but there weren't too many shots that made me go, whoa, that's super cool. And then when they go in the basement, it's really dark and not in like a super interesting way, the way the Batman was. It's genuinely just hard to see and looks kind of shitty and disgusting. And at a certain point, I was kind of ready to leave the movie. I was really almost like offensively disappointed with this movie. And the reason I'm so disappointed is because, yeah, I just think this movie could have been an incredible discussion about faith. There are so many movies, like horror movies, right, that have religious aspects that have you sitting there afterwards going like, was that real? Was that not real? Think of Martyrs, right? If you've seen Martyrs, it asks a question at the end of that movie after all this suffering as to whether they were actually able to pull off something that was genuinely transcendent. And as a result, after you finish the movie, even though most of it is just torture and pain, the thing you're left thinking about is like, oh my God, what was the final thing that was said? What does that mean? What does that ending mean? And it's been discussed for like 15, 20 years ever since that movie came out. Similarly, right, I think A24's The Curse, one of my favorite shows of this year, really explored that well, where there are things that can be explained, but not quite. It's like, oh, I guess that could have a logical explanation, but it's just so uncanny. And then the ending of that show takes it into this other level where you're like, oh my God. And I just feel like Heretic, it had all the pieces, it had all these great ideas where it's like, just bring it home. And I was sitting there for so long being like, okay, as long as the ending's good, something has to happen. Whether it's like so dark and not supernatural, but he's just so evil that it's like a gripping thriller and I'm really rooting for them to get away, but that didn't happen. Or genuinely bring something that is like confrontingly like, yeah, supernatural or faith-based and have me go, oh my God. But no, they didn't do that. And there are just so many movies that do. Red State is another great example where there is a religious component to that movie. And the evil people are these religious nuts that are killing innocent people. And then there's this moment towards the end of the movie where they're like, wait, were they onto something? I'm not going to spoil how that movie ends, but you're sitting there going, oh my God, where is this going? And yeah, unfortunately, I just felt like this movie lacked a bunch of clever little things that had me sitting there going like, wow, that was so well done. Again, even Hereditary, right? If you've seen Hereditary, there are all these moments where when you watch the film a second time, you're like, oh my God, all of this was preordained. All of this was set up. These things that felt like tragic incidents and tragic accidents, like were actually planted by this divine presence that was watching over this family. How haunting and tragic. But no, this movie, none of that. None of that. Just two girls show up to a house and a guy mansplains religion for 30 minutes and then, makes them go through doors that ultimately don't matter and then tries to kill them after fucking about. And yeah, just all of these conversations, every single time I found one interesting, then the way it ended was not interesting. Like they'd have these conversations and then one character would be like, that's not true, and I know that's not true, the end. And you're like, oh, okay. And then they introduce the prophet and you're like, oh, interesting. When she gets back and she goes, oh, I think the prophet moved after he killed her, after she ate the blueberry pie. I'm like, oh, where's this going? Then she just kind of explains to him exactly what he did, which ends up being true. Like, showing the body double of the prophet was just so disappointing. Like, I would have loved to finish the movie being like, did he actually conjure something? No. And they double down on it. You get the explanation from her and then it visually confirms it for you. And it's just like, okay. Then at the end of the movie, you have this moment, this really interesting moment with like the key and the bike clock. And she goes, you want me to think that this is actually like divine intervention, but you obviously did this intentionally because you always wanted me to be the final girl, yada, yada, yada. And you're like, okay, thank you for explaining all that. Now I have nothing to think about on the car ride home. And again, my big issue with the movie is I know a lot of you are probably going to sit there and say, hey, Marshall, like he was meant to be an idiot. He was meant to be the bad guy. He wasn't meant to be that deep. But I disagree. I think the movie thought these conversations were really interesting and really profound. And I've seen all these reviews being like, yeah, this is one of the best scripts of the year. And I'm like, no. Not at all. This feels like just the conversation you have when you're 13 and you're first exposed to the fact that, hey, a lot of these religions have similar ideas. How wacky. Well, there can't be 52 religions. Blah, 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 blah. It's mansplaining. But again, the amount of time and focus they spent on these conversations and the way it's directed as if it's like lofty and weighty and profound is the reason this movie doesn't work, in my opinion, because it clearly wants you to ask these questions. Similarly, right, I've seen multiple reviews reference this conversation about Magnum condoms at the start of the movie as like really interesting and profound and shows how like some people can have faith and some people don't. And it's like, no, it's just marketing. And you can literally check whether Magnum condoms are larger than normal condoms or not by just getting a ruler and checking. Like this isn't actually a good allegory for the disbelief versus belief argument that has been explored in this movie at all. Like it's actually not very good. It's not very smart. This is very first draft material, in my opinion. Like, honestly, it's like me comparing buying an Apple fast charger because the advertisement says it charges my phone 40 minutes faster than the other chargers, and me getting into a van with like a child predator because he offered me candy and a puppy, and instead all I get is like trauma for the rest of my life. They are actually different, all right? Like, don't give me this shit. Also, the conversation's just stupid. Just Google it. Just check, hey, are Magnum condoms actually bigger or is it just marketing? The end. End of discussion. Like, this isn't... Stop it. And the reason I say this is because, yes, you could make the argument that the movie doesn't think this is that smart, but all these like video essay YouTube bros on YouTube are like, yeah, this is like a really interesting point that highlights the themes of the movie. And I'm like, no, it's stupid, don't.
The first piece of dialogue was about the size of the contraception Magnum versus all of the other ones. Both Paxton and Barnes had different views on it and consumed the message of its marketing completely differently. Something that had no relevance to religion, but it showed word of mouth with Barnes' sister telling her about them versus the marketing message, which was what Paxton had experienced. They had two different messages from two different sources, and at its most basic form, that is essentially what the film was about.
Actually a conversation to introduce us to one of the underlying themes of the film, which is how deception and manipulation can be used to persuade and confuse people, making the girls question once again if the things around them that they are being told are true or not.
Also, another great idea, right? Can you imagine how interesting it would be if Hugh Grant had like insane knowledge about these two girls? Like they thought they were going to a random house and he knows about her dead dad. He knows all these intricate details about her medical history. He knows that she has the birth control implant, like these things that are impossible for him to know. Can you imagine how unsettling that would be if he knew all these disturbing things, if he knew, about the conversation about the porno at the start of the movie, how effective and unsettling that could have been? Like, give me something to think about. And even if you could find a logical explanation, like at the end of the movie, there's all this like Facebook stalking he'd been doing, or like he had something planted on them from like ages ago, like just a little bit for me on the drive home to go, oh, wow, how interesting. Because as a result, the way this movie was presented, I just got in the car and went, oh, what a disappointment. And the only thing I was thinking about is how disappointed it is. And look, as far as the ending goes, no, all right? Paxton did not die, and then the final chunk of the movie is imaginary. No, she did get out. I took the butterfly at the end as like, she can see the butterfly because it felt like it was framed from her POV. And then it cuts to a more objective POV, and we can see that the butterfly is not there. I took that as she still has faith, even if us, the audience, don't, showing that the butterfly isn't actually there, but she believes it to be there. However, you could easily take it the other way and say that the fact that the butterfly is shown to almost like leave and not be there anymore is the idea that she has a little bit of faith, but she now questions it. Or the butterfly vanishing is a representation of her faith leaving. But like, I just don't think the movie was interesting enough for me to particularly care or find that a particularly profound ending. Unfortunately, I didn't like this movie. I've really been a fan of a lot of movies lately. I've given a lot of movies a pass, defended a lot of movies that other people have shit on, found it incredibly disappointing. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and have a lovely day.